Hello everyone, DarkOfAllTrades here. So looking through the first YouTube poll, it was a pretty close one. The teleological argument got a quarter of all the votes, but narrowly beating it out by only 1% is the moral argument. So that is the first video I'm going to take a deep dive into. Check my YouTube channel for the next poll and vote for the next video. If you like this kind of content, let me know. I really enjoy doing these kinds of videos. So let's look at the moral argument for the existence of God. The moral argument is considered by theists and some atheists to be one of the strongest arguments that apologists have. There are several forms of the argument, but today I'm going to take aim at arguably the strongest form of the moral argument, which comes from one Dr. William Lane Craig. But fret not, I'm not here to bore you with dry recitation of arguments and counter-arguments. There are plenty of those on the YouTubes already. Instead, I'm going to do something a bit radical. I'm going to try to make philosophy more fun. Now I know what you're thinking, how can philosophy be fun? Well, stick around and you'll see that it's all about approaching these weighty topics with a dash of humor and a pinch of common sense. After all, if philosophy can't be enjoyable, what's the point? So we're going to give Dr. Craig's argument a friendly but rigorous once-over, and who knows, we might even uncover some philosophical Easter eggs along the way. So let's get ready to flex those brain muscles and prepare to question the very foundations of moral philosophy. But remember, we're here for truth, not to score points. So let's tackle this argument head-on, armed with wit, wisdom, and a healthy dose of skepticism. William Lane Craig's moral argument for the existence of God has been a staple of philosophical debates for quite some time. As a formal argument, it looks like this. 1. Objective morals exist. 2. Objective moral duties exist. 3. God is the best explanation. 4. Without God, objective morality is unexplained. 5. Therefore, God exists. There's a lot to this. It's no wonder that philosophers have been chewing on this argument for a while. Now let's dissect this piece by piece. And remember, we're here to have some intellectual fun while we're at it. So let's take that deep dive into the argument's intricacies. Starting with the first premise. Objective moral values exist. Now, like a lot of people, your initial reaction might be, well, of course they do. But hold on a second, because there's a bit more to this than meets the eye. This premise assumes that objective moral values exist independently of human opinions, cultural norms, and subjective experiences. It's like saying there's an objective best flavor of ice cream, and it's not just a matter of personal taste. But can we really make such a claim? Are moral values as objective as saying that vanilla ice cream exists? I mean, imagine going to the ice cream parlor and saying, "I'll have a scoop of objective moral values, please." The puzzled look on the server would be priceless. But in all seriousness, this is a significant point of contention in the world of philosophy. Some argue that moral values are, in fact, grounded in something beyond human opinion, while others take a more skeptical stance, suggesting that they're a result of cultural and evolutionary factors. So you see, we're already knee-deep in the philosophical ice cream here. The logical fallacy that rears its head here is the begging the question fallacy. This premise assumes that objective moral values exist without providing any concrete evidence. It's a bit like saying, I know I'm right because I know I'm right. Well, that doesn't quite cut it in the world of rigorous philosophical debate. Moving on to premise 2, objective moral duties exist. Now this is where things get even more interesting. It's not just about recognizing that objective moral values are out there, it's also claiming that there are objective moral obligations, duties, and commands that we must follow. It's like saying there's an objective best way to eat spaghetti, and if you don't twirl your fork just right, you're morally wrong. But in all seriousness, we're back in the territory of begging the question. It's like saying you have a moral duty because there's an objective moral duty. This premise raises a lot of questions. Where's the evidence? Where's the solid foundation upon which we can build this premise? How do we determine these objective moral duties? Who gets to decide what's morally obligatory and what's not? And more importantly, how do we know that these duties come from a divine source? This is where Dr. Craig brings in the big guns. God. Premise 3. God is the best explanation. Ah, yes, the divine trump card. This is where things really heat up. Dr. Craig argues that God is not just any explanation, but the best explanation for these objective moral values and duties. It's like saying that the best explanation for your missing sandwich in the office fridge is that a divine sandwich-loving deity exists. It's a bold claim, to say the least. But let's be fair, this argument isn't just about sandwiches. It's about the very nature of morality and its origins. And this is where the rubber meets the road in the debate. If you're a theist, you might find this premise quite appealing, but if you're not, well, you might be reaching for a different explanation. Perhaps one that doesn't involve divine intervention in our moral affairs. This premise falls squarely under what we call special pleading. It's when you single out a particular entity, in this case God, as an explanation for something without applying the same standards to other possible explanations. It's like saying, my favorite ice cream is the best because I said so. But of course, the other flavors might have something to say about that. Now let's tackle premise 4. Without God, objective morality is unexplained. This is the linchpin of the argument. It suggests that if we remove God from the equation, we're left scratching our heads, wondering where these objective moral values and duties could possibly have come from. This is where the argument from ignorance fallacy comes into play. It essentially says, if we can't explain it without God, then God must be the explanation. If we don't believe in Santa Claus, we can't explain where those presents under the tree came from. But of course, there are alternative explanations out there. Secular moral theories like utilitarianism or Kantian ethics offer their own accounts of objective morality without invoking a divine being. So while Dr. Craig might be making a strong case here, it's not the only game in town. Instead, it's a leap of logic that doesn't quite hold water. And finally, we arrive at the grand conclusion. Therefore, God exists. Ah, the moment of truth. Dr. Craig asserts that because objective moral values and duties need a divine foundation, God must be real. This is where it all comes together. Or does it? Well, not quite. Even granting every single premise, this commits another logical fallacy. This time, it is the non sequitur. It's like saying that because we found presents under the tree, Santa Claus must exist. The conclusion doesn't logically follow from the premises, and that is a bit like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. But of course, we should always be cautious about jumping to conclusions. But hold on, my fellow thinkers and learners. It's not just about pointing out the logical fallacies. We must also consider some of the broader challenges to this argument. One of them is the Euthyphro dilemma. It asks whether something is good because God commands it, or if God commands it because it is inherently good. If the former is true, it raises concerns about arbitrary divine command ethics. If the latter is true, it suggests that moral values exist independently of God, which undermines the argument's premise. The response that has gained some popularity among apologists is called revised divine command theory. Revised divine command theory posits that moral values and duties are grounded in God's unchanging and inherently good nature rather than being arbitrary divine commands, providing a more robust foundation for objective morality. It attempts to address some of the criticisms of the traditional divine command theory, but it's not without its own significant challenges. Critics argue that it merely shifts the arbitrariness from divine commands to God's nature. They question how we can determine what constitutes God's nature and whether our understanding of that is reliable. Furthermore, it still faces the Euthyphro dilemma, as it prompts us to ask whether something is good because it reflects God's nature, or whether God's nature is defined by what is good. Additionally, while this theory presupposes the existence of God, it also assumes a specific conception of God's nature, which may not be universally accepted. In essence, it doesn't provide anywhere near a satisfying explanation for the objectivity of morality and leaves unanswered questions about the source and the nature of moral values. And then there's the problem of evil. If God is supposed to be the source of objective moral values and duties, why do we observe so much suffering and evil in the world? It's like saying, my chef is the best because I've tasted the most delicious meals, but I also found a fly in my soup. The coexistence of a benevolent God and the existence of suffering raises significant questions. In this context, a provocative twist can be considered. The possibility that God, as traditionally conceived, could be the source of moral malevolence rather than or along with moral goodness. This unconventional perspective challenges the assumption that God is the foundation of objective moral values and duties and invites us to question whether the deity portrayed in certain religious texts might, in fact, endorse or command actions that we would typically deem morally reprehensible. It raises the unsettling possibility that if God is the ultimate source of morality, then moral values and duties could be shaped by God's nature, which we have many instances where his actions and nature may not necessarily align with what we consider to be virtuous and just. This alternative explanation highlights the complexity of the moral argument and encourages us to critically examine the nature of God's relationship with morality and whether it truly supports the argument's premises. So there you have it, my fellow explorers of philosophy. We've uncovered some logical fallacies, pondered the Euthyphro dilemma, and grappled with the problem of evil. All of this shows that even at its absolute strongest, the argument just doesn't get us to the existence of a God. It still leaves us with many questions like, is morality truly objective? Can we be certain that moral values and duties are genuinely objective and not shaped by cultural, social, or evolutionary factors? How do we distinguish between objective and subjective morality? The Euthyphro dilemma. Does God's commanding of moral values make them arbitrary, contingent on divine will, and potentially subject to change? Or do moral values exist independently of God, undermining the argument's premise? The plurality of gods. How does the moral argument account for the existence of multiple religious and cultural belief systems, each proposing their own gods and moral codes? Does this not cast doubt on the uniqueness of the God presented in the argument? The problem of evil. How can a benevolent and omnipotent God coexist with the presence of evil and suffering in the world? If God is the source of objective moral values and duties, why do these evils persist, seemingly in contradiction to these values? But remember, this journey is far from over. There's still much to explore and dissect in the world of philosophical arguments. If you're enjoying this journey, consider joining our community by clicking that like and subscribe button below. It's your passport to never miss an episode. As we embark on this philosophical dungeon-delving adventure, I would like to extend an ever-so-gracious nod to the ever-supportive patrons, Long-Haired Lefty, Musical Ocelot, Jammin' Bomb, and Kai Henningsen. Your dedication is the fuel for this quest for knowledge. Stay curious, stay critical, and stay tuned for the next episode, where we'll venture even deeper into the heart of intellectual arguments for the existence of God. Until then, keep questioning, keep pondering, and remember, philosophy can be both a maze and a treasure hunt. And as always, keep learning.